Today I'm out here in southern Washington taking a look at one of the most ridiculous, yet strangely one of the coolest vehicles you can buy in America today, if you have pockets that are deep enough. This is the Mercedes-Benz G63 AMG, the high horsepower version of the G-Wagon in America. Now the G-Wagon is already a bit of an odd duck. After 40 years on sale, they finally redesigned the vehicle. So this is only the second generation ever for the G-Wagon. It started back in the 70s as sort of a pet project for the Shah of Iran. He wanted a military vehicle, he owned a portion of Mercedes, so Mercedes created the original G-Wagon just for him. And since then it has turned into not just a military vehicle, but also an odd sort of luxury vehicle. Because the G-Wagon has been such an icon in the world, they decided to not really change the formula too much. Even though this is a complete redesign and shares under 10 parts with the last generation G-Wagon, it is designed to look almost identical. You really do have to park them next to each other to really determine the difference. We have the same style hood up front, these large turn signals right there mounted on the hood. We have a 360-degree camera system that's helping bring things up into the 21st century, new headlamps, and a brush guard that is standard in America. Mercedes didn't just recreate the G-Wagon with a different batch of parts. They made this significantly larger than the last model. We have extra length, which gives us more rear seat legroom. We get slightly more ground clearance than the last generation model. At the moment, we don't have the option of portal axles yet, but you can expect that that will eventually come to the G-Wagon. Those axles allow the G-Wagon to have considerably more ground clearance than the model that we see here, but they are a pretty expensive option. Those were available in the previous generation G-Wagon at the very end. But the most noticeable difference is the overall width of the G-Wagon. It has gotten significantly wider in this generation. That gives us more width across the front and rear bench seats, and it makes it a little bit more stable out on the road. For an extra touch of nostalgia, we get the same spare tire cover right back here that we found in the last generation G63, and we still have a door that opens to the side right back here rather than a more traditional lift gate. This does make it easier to put some large items in the vehicle because you can get pretty close, you don't have to worry about clearance, but it does make opening this in parallel parking situations a little bit tricky. Overall cargo capacity is relatively good for a two-row vehicle. We get this very high and square cargo area, but it's not as deep as some of the competition, something more along the lines of a Range Rover. And it's really obvious if you were to put a lot of luggage in this vehicle, although you could again stack it a little bit higher. Although there are a variety of different engines around the world, in America we only get 4-liter twin-turbo V8 engines under this hood. The regular G-Wagon has to make do with only 416 horsepower and 450 pound-feet of torque, but if you get the AMG version, then things bump up to 577 horsepower and 627 pound-feet of torque. Power is routed to all four wheels by default via a 9-speed automatic transmission, and we get a 2-speed transfer case and again those 3 locking differentials, one up front, one in the middle, and one in the rear. As I said at the beginning of the video, some of the luxury competition will have a 2-speed transfer case. You will find one, for instance, in a Range Rover, but you won't find 3 locking differentials in that Range Rover. You also won't find 3 locking differentials in something like a Bentley Bentayga or, of course, a Rolls-Royce Cullinan, both of which I suppose you could call almost competitors to the G-Wagon. As with the previous generation G-Class, the seating position is still very upright, and things are still very, very square in here. So for instance, this windshield is really, really close to the driver, although it is raked just a little bit more than the last generation model. Overall seat comfort is absolutely excellent, whether we're talking about comparisons to Range Rover models or the next category up that's definitely more expensive than the model that we're driving here. These seats have the active massage feature, the inflatable side bolsters that will grab you in the corners, 4-way adjustable lumbar support, and of course 3-position memory over there on the seat for the driver and the front passenger. Oddly enough, the G-Wagon was originally supposed to be replaced by the GLS 3-row crossover. Quite clearly not the same kind of animal as the vehicle that we're driving today. And one of the big differences is going to be in rear seat accommodations. Everything is definitely put together very well back here. We have full leather stitched doors, the same level of attention to detail as we find up front, but we just don't find as much room back here or seats that are quite as comfortable as we find in the GLS. The rear seats do offer a recline function. You can put them a little bit more upright right like that to square off the cargo area in the rear, and you can give them a little bit of recline, but there's not as much motion as we find in the GLS. Hopping inside, the changes versus the last generation G-Wagon are immediately obvious. This has all the latest parts from the Mercedes parts bin, so it definitely is more in keeping with the rest of the Mercedes lineup than the last G-Wagon. We have a pretty standard sized moonroof right there over the driver and front passengers' heads, height adjustable shoulder belts, and 6-way adjustable headrests. These move in and out, up and down, and then we have these butterflies right on top. The front seats offer heating, ventilation, and massage, and as we move on over to the doors, you'll notice a big difference between this and the last generation G-Wagon. There are no more visible screws going on in this interior, and everything definitely feels more premium. This entire door is covered in stitched leather, all the way from the top, around these difficult corners, all the way down there to the bottom where your feet will rub. Since this is the AMG model, instead of wood trim, we find carbon fiber on the doors and on the dashboard. Moving over to that dashboard, we find again more leather all the way from the top all the way down there to the bottom in this two-tone arrangement. We have real metal trim going on right there around the air vents, and then more of that carbon fiber here and there. We have a large screen infotainment system basically borrowed out of the S-Class. Now this does not run Mercedes-Benz latest infotainment software, so this is not a touchscreen. It still uses the control wheel right there in the center console. You'll notice that there are two different LEDs. Yellow is what has been commanded, red is what is engaged right now. So if I were to disengage that lock, you'll notice the yellow light will turn off. Same thing right here for that one. The center lock engages pretty much immediately, but the other differentials may need to be moved slightly for them to engage. So as I roll forward in drive or in reverse, you'd eventually see those transition to red. Also in the center console is this roller cover, which covers two large cup holders right there, very easy to use. We then have the controller for the infotainment system. We have this knob controller and then a touch controller as well. This is the drive mode selector, allows us to choose between the various drive modes: slippery, individual, comfort, sport, and sport plus. We have a manual mode engagement, a button to engage the two different levels for the active suspension tuning, stability and traction control enable disable button, and then this controls the engine exhaust noise. The center armrest opens in a split fashion like we see in some of Mercedes sedans, and it gives us access to a moderately sized storage compartment. That's also where you'll find the USB inputs. On the driver's side, we find the same full LCD instrument cluster that we see in the Mercedes-Benz S-Class and a number of their other recent sedans. And then we find a very similar three-spoke steering wheel with this split bottom spoke right here. We have paddle shifters on the back, down on the left, and up over there on the right, and then the same controls that we see in those newer Mercedes models as well. On the right side, we have some infotainment buttons: volume, up, down, favorites button, voice command button, and then dedicated phone hang-up and pickup button. You'll notice that we don't have a dedicated track forward and backward button here, however. You'd have to use some of the other controls to get that functionality. The home button, the back button, and this BlackBerry-style touch controller control the infotainment display in the center console, while the nearly identical buttons on the other side of the steering wheel control the multifunction instrument cluster right behind the steering wheel. This is also where we find the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control system. The G63 is probably the ultimate conflicted vehicle. This has essentially the same AMG 4-liter V8 that we find in a wide variety of AMG products, from the AMG GT 4-door sedan to the AMG S-Class, E-Class, etc. But they've jammed it under the hood of ostensibly an off-road oriented vehicle. Again, you could consider this sort of a luxury Jeep Wrangler if you wanted to look at it that way, because the Jeep Wrangler Rubicon is one of the only other vehicles in America that also has 3 locking differentials and has the off-road kind of ability that we see in the G-Wagon. Only obviously this is a considerably more expensive vehicle, definitely much more luxury focused, and of course now in this version, performance focused. 0 to 60 happens incredibly quickly in 3.9 seconds, which is astounding for a vehicle that's this big, this heavy, and this square. Now unfortunately, the laws of physics still have to be obeyed, and this is a tall off-road vehicle, so handling, although good for a G-Wagon and good sort of in general terms for a big luxury SUV, is not going to be where you'd expect it to be in the average AMG vehicle, something like, again, the GT 4-door. Now, the combination of high horsepower and high ground clearance isn't necessarily that unusual, of course. We do have things like the Grand Cherokee Trackhawk, 707 horsepower. We have the absolutely insane BMW X5M. And then, of course, we have a host of different Mercedes-AMG models out there as well. But none of them are quite the same thing as this G-Wagon, including that Grand Cherokee Trackhawk. Because in the process of converting that into the Trackhawk, they didn't just put a more powerful engine under the hood, they also removed some of the off-road capable components. So the Trackhawk is much less off-road capable than the Trailhawk in the Grand Cherokee lineup, and arguably this G63 AMG is just as off-road capable as the regular G-Wagon. The only real difference between this and the G550 in terms of off-road ability is going to be the tires that they put on this one from the factory, but if you put identical off-road oriented tires, this would be just as rugged and just as capable as that G-Wagon. Only we'd have nearly 600 horsepower under the hood, which is pretty insane. We also have that incredible amount of torque and the very Mercedes way of delivering power and torque, which is a little bit unlike what we see in the Grand Cherokee. We don't have overall braking distances for this model, but I suspect they're going to be a little bit shorter than the regular G-Wagon, but not really too different from that model. The G-Wagon's overall design doesn't really lend itself to sporty stopping or sporty handling just because of the overall shape, size of the vehicle, and the weight, etc. So when it comes to overall braking and handling ability, this is certainly not going to be the equal of something along the lines of an X5M or the AMG version of the GLE either. If you want a little bit of off-road ability and a lot of on-track fun, that's where the GLC AMG and the GLE AMG come in. But if you want a little bit of on-road fun and a lot of off-road fun, theoretically, that's where the GLE 63 is. Even in the comfort mode that we're now in, the suspension is definitely a little bit firmer than the G550. And because of the overall dimensions of the G-Wagon, the relatively short wheelbase, relatively narrow vehicle overall compared to some of the options out there, we don't have a ride that is quite as soft or quite as smooth. And on washboard pavement, we do get a little bit of bobblehead going on in the car. But any way you slice it, this is still much more civilized than the outgoing G-Wagon. Bottom line, the G63 is an awful lot of fun out on the road, but this is a different kind of fun than you get in something along the lines of the X5M. Handling is again not quite the G63's forte, although it is certainly improved over the last generation model and over the G550 as well. But that's because this is more off-road focused. So this is definitely the kind of vehicle where you can go fast in a straight line, you have that excellent exhaust note, and then you have the off-road ability that you might want if you were willing to take a $170,000 car off-road. But if you're interested in a vehicle that could do it if you ever wanted to, then this is definitely the vehicle for you. The Mercedes G-Wagon is quite simply the craziest SUV you can buy in America today, and the G63 is the ultimate expression of that insanity. Way over 500 horsepower, but still 3 locking differentials and one of the most off-road capable chassis that's available anywhere in the world. Now obviously there are some downsides, and the biggest downside is the absolutely enormous price tag. And you could look at this sort of two ways. You could buy, 3 or 4 Jeep Wranglers for the price of one G-Wagon, or you could buy 2 G-Wagons for the price of a Bentley or a Rolls-Royce SUV, and you could definitely go further off the beaten path in this than those other options. The G63 is also notably less expensive than top-end versions of the Range Rover. So while this is also fantastically expensive, it is simultaneously a strangely good deal in the luxury segment. But is the G63 the ultimate performance SUV? In my opinion, no. Because this is almost a performance SUV. It definitely goes quickly 0 to 60. 0 to 100 is incredibly quick in this vehicle if you dare get it that fast. But the handling ability is just not where we see the more on-road focused entries in the segment. And that's one of the things that I love about the G-Wagon, is that they have kept all of the off-road capability while giving this an absolutely insane amount of power. There are very few vehicles, period, in America that have 3 locking differentials, and this over 500 horsepower model still retains that off-road functionality. If we take a look at supercharged versions of the Range Rover lineup, you definitely won't be able to take them the same kind of places you could take this model. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that down there in the comments section below, and let me know if, in your opinion, there really is any parallel to the G-Wagon other than something like a Jeep Wrangler Rubicon. Let me know down there in the comment section below. If you haven't already done so, hit that subscribe button. Be sure and find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, Instagram, Twitter, all those other social things, and I'll see you later. I want to give a quick shout out to the Automotive Video Association. Alex on Autos, along with Redline Reviews, TFL Car, TFL Truck, Engineering Explained, and Matt Moran Motoring were all founding members of this association. And without this particular group, we wouldn't be able to have access to the cars we've had access to this weekend up here in Washington, and we wouldn't be able to get cars like this back to back or together for combined videos. So be sure to check out those other channels and see their takes on the same vehicles that we've been able to drive this weekend.